Simple is simplify processes, amplify results. Simple is.
First of all, I would like to thank Vincent for being a guest speaker. I think he brings with him tremendous wealth of knowledge and information. He's been part of a lot of partnerships, so I'm very excited to hear from him and see what he has to say. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Yasser. I'm the founder of SimpleEd. SimpleEd is an organization that does two things. We help international institutions recruit globally through our events recruitment tours. And when we do these tours, one of the most commonly asked questions are, how can we partner with international institutions, right? And typically we know that recruiters might not be the best people who typically engage in partnerships, collaborations, and MOU discussions. So one of the things that SimpleEd does annually is we create an event that is completely focused on international education partnerships. So we bring institutions from India together along with institutions, international institutions together under one roof. And the whole agenda of those 2 days is to make sure that both parties have opportunity to interact with each other, and every discussion is around partnerships and collaborations. You can schedule meetings with each other through our conference website, and there are sessions, there are workshops. There is also a partnership fair. So this is a great event if you are interested in meeting a lot of universities that are as enthusiastic as you about partnerships and collaborations, and a great way to have a great ROI because you don't have to travel to multiple places and you can meet decision makers and key stakeholders under one roof. With that being said, I'm very excited about today's topic because the most commonly asked question when we talk about collaborations, specifically when it's across borders, it's exchanges, right? And a lot of institutions, professionals might not know how to do it or how others are doing it. So today, Vincent is going to share some really key insight into how you can go about creating these partnerships and what are the things that you can keep in mind. So once again, thank you so much, Vincent. Over to you.
Thank you, Yasser, for the invitation, and thank you, Aline, for all the work you did putting this together. I greatly appreciate it. I'll just give a brief background, some information on myself and CCIP. I began working with CCIP right before COVID. CCIP had primarily focused on developing partnerships with European and Australian universities. So the crux of these partnerships are based on, or the cornerstone of them is based on student benefits, right? How the student benefits. If the student isn't benefiting, then the partnerships after a period of time will fizzle out for sure. So our partnerships in particular benefit the students because they're receiving a Western diploma, which in the Chinese labor market is desirable, more desirable than a Chinese degree, to say the very least. So how else do these students benefit? Well, of course, they have a wonderful immersive experience when they travel to the U.S. and study in the U.S. and have those intercultural experiences beyond just the, having a degree which helps them get a better job, right? They have a life experience forever. And beyond that, they also obtain a benefit with our partnerships of studying, dipping their toes in the water, is how I like to phrase it, into a Western classroom while they're still in China. They have the ability, they take about 14 courses that are taught by a Western professor in English while they're in China. And that has a variety of benefits that make the transition into studying on the American campus much easier. Less of a culture shock and things of that nature. So those are some of the main benefits that the students derive from these partnerships, which take a lot of strategic thinking and effort by the administrators who set them up years in advance. So there are two types of these MOUs. There's registered and unregistered. We only work on registered partnerships for a variety of reasons. For unregistered partnerships, they're definitely easier to establish. You don't need the Ministry of Education to approve them, and you don't need to report every year on your results. And you can do as many of them as you like. But with most things in life that are worth doing, there's a little more level of difficulty. There's a little bit more level of effort required for it to be worth it. There's a deeper relationship between two institutions that are trying to grow together and perhaps do research together and send faculty abroad and things of that nature. So there's more to it than just let's sign an MOU and see if some kids come. No, it's a well thought out process. Okay, so why are they more successful, right? So the first reason is that the Chinese government has required its institutions to internationalize. And how do you internationalize? Well, one of the ways you can do that is by just signing on registered MOUs. That will get you a very small amount of credit. But they don't continually report back to the Ministry of Education. It doesn't leave a lasting impression. A registered partnership has the benefit of the fact that that check-in, right, the fact that you've established something that every year you're reporting the results to, and the fact that you have this higher or deeper level of collaboration, it gets you more points in the Ministry of Education system effectively, where those universities that are involved in these partnerships have that benefit, where their ranking will move up within the internal rankings of Chinese institutions, and where their administrators and presidents will receive more positive career opportunities for advancing their institution, for improving their institution. So the evaluation that's done by the Ministry of Education has two different components to it: a qualitative and a quantitative. Right. So on the quantitative side, how many students are actually transferring from the American institution from the Chinese institution to the American institution? How many are graduating? But it goes a step up beyond that for the qualitative, right? Are these students then going on to pursue graduate or doctoral degrees? Are they conducting research, right? So the Chinese institution is trying to promote its best students and prepare them to transfer and then have a successful career, whether it be in academia or not in academia, but give them the best leg up and really be the face of the university abroad. So firstly, your cohort size is limited to 100, right? So we're only picking the top students that apply, or the top 100 students that apply into this partnership, or apply into this major path, I should call it instead. So you have a filtering mechanism that's promoting or filtering out for only the top students. The second aspect is the fact that, as I mentioned before, the students are learning English as part of the curriculum that we've designed. That's a part of it. Whereas they're not having to go out on their own necessarily and engage in some courses and then try to transfer later on. This is baked into the Chinese curriculum. But beyond that, there's courses taught in English in China so that they can begin to have that experience and learn from it in preparation for when they will transfer to the American campus. That definitely helps with retention rates and success rates, which is instrumental, right? We don't just want the students to transfer. We want them to graduate and go on to a graduate degree beyond their bachelor degree. So we see those key components as benefiting the student and the institution. And also, there's a component of financial means to this. If a student has to study in America for 4 years, it's very expensive. But if it's for a shorter period of time, right, because this partnership has been established and they're able to do that, they are able to invest some of those resources into a graduate degree, right? And that's very much an increasing desire of Chinese students and parents, given the tough labor market, which we'll discuss later. So how does the U.S. institution benefit? I like to break this into two different sections. There's the cohort and the non-cohort benefits. So obviously we're preparing a specific cohort of 100 students, exceptional students. We're focusing on them. We have a project manager who's checking in on them. And that is the main point of the partnership. But there are non-cohort benefits as well, right? So as I mentioned, the graduate students, right? So some of the cohort students may pursue a graduate degree once they've completed the undergraduate degree on your campus. But also, we have a project manager or recruiter per se on the Chinese campus for this partnership. This is a CCIP employee whose job it is to promote your institution, this partnership in particular, but in general as well. And so we do see a fair amount of recruitment to other graduate degrees as well, outside of just the main cohort. So, you can't have your cake and eat it too. There are some rules and there are some aspects of that that have to be followed, right? So, as I mentioned, firstly, I'd actually like to discuss how CCIP doesn't charge the American institution fees, or consulting fees. The Chinese institution actually pays us to help them find a partner that is going to work out, basically. And then they do pay us on a continual basis after the partnership is established to act as a liaison, to recruit, to promote the partnership amongst the students, etc. So you have effectively a free China office established for you on that campus at no cost. Now, there are some rules that have to be followed when you apply for the MOE compared to when you're not registered, right? So you can't just apply for multiple partnerships in 1 year. You can only do one at a time. Beyond that, you have to wait 4 years in between each approval period. So, in terms of a strategy, or in terms of those implications, you have to be more strategic, I should say, right, with how you're going to develop your partnerships, because you can't just do one every year. You have to wait and see how the results of the first one are before you can do another one. At least the first cohort has to transfer. And so that's why it's a 4-year waiting period or review period. Additionally, you cannot, even over a long period of time, develop 10 or 20 of these. Back in the early 2000s, you could have. That has changed. For larger institutions, there is a cap of 6. For smaller institutions, the cap is lower, and so it depends on your enrollment primarily whether or not you can pursue, 3, 4, 5, or even 6 of these. So that's another restriction that has to be considered. And some institutions do want to or consider doing 4+0 partnerships where they establish a campus in China. And if you wish to pursue that, you have to think about that relative to your cap, right? So if you establish a 3+1 hypothetically, and you have the desire, your president says we might want to consider a 4+0, well, that's typically 2 or 3 partnerships in one. So you have to consider after you've completed your first application successfully, okay, can we do another one, or do we need to switch gears and do 4+0, or do we just give up the option to do that and develop more over time, 3+1 effectively? The last component or rule of these partnerships is that there is curriculum being shared and exchanged. So there's 2 ways to satisfy this requirement. In some cases, or the default is that you can just share your syllabi, and then the Chinese institution and CCIP will develop courses based on the syllabi, and we will recruit foreign teachers for you. But the other way is your own professors can go as well, of course, but it's not a requirement. It's an opportunity, not an obligation. There are some partnership structures where it is an obligation, and you are issuing credits in China. So it's very important to distinguish between the two. And the barrier is, or the clear dividing line is when there's revenue share. If the Chinese institution is sharing tuition revenue with a foreign institution, then there is an obligation, not an opportunity to send faculty. If there's no revenue being exchanged from the Chinese side, right, from the Chinese tuition collected, then it is an opportunity for your faculty to go abroad, but not an obligation. So there definitely has to be some sharing of curriculum. That's one of the key points of why it's a registered partnership, right? You're committing on a deeper level to work together towards preparing these students. Whereas, but you don't have necessarily the obligation to send your own faculty, which is a confusing point or misunderstood sometimes by institutions, that you can do it this way. But once again, once Chinese tuition is being shared with the American partner, then everything switches. Then it's no, now there is an obligation, not an opportunity. So in that line of thought, that's basically the main points of the rules and costs associated with these partnerships. So how does the course mapping process work for sharing curriculum? Well, we take the Chinese 4-year course mapping. We take the American 4-year course plan as well. And then CCIP will suggest 9 to 14 courses typically to be introduced into the Chinese curriculum. And of those courses, or once we prepared a draft of what we think works, including those courses that we've introduced, we then provide it to your dean or your chair to review and make modifications. From that point, right, where we've shared a draft, we typically have a meeting together between the institutions to iron out any details. But there's a fairly standardized, there's certain core requirements that are very frequent. So the majority of the time, it's a smooth process. There's a couple of courses that maybe need to be looked at in greater detail. But generally speaking, we try to make it very easy on the deans or chairperson who want to work on these projects by not saying, okay, you two figure it out. Now we're going to draft it for you. We're going to look at the course descriptions and requirements. That way, you walk into a draft that is well prepared. So the MOE currently is allowing 3+1s. In the past 2+2s were possible. That has been that opportunity no longer exists. So what can you expect with such a partnership? Well, it's one major. We choose one major to develop a partnership in, and the recruitment, depending on a variety of factors such as tuition and rank, the average number of students that transfer per year to the American institution is between 15 and 30. Some institutions have trouble with 3+1 for accreditation purposes. So we do offer 2 solutions or 2 workarounds to make it more palatable. The first is implementing a 3+1.5, where the summer between junior year and senior year, the students will come earlier, right, in the summer, and take some courses. That way, they're not overloaded in the 2 American semesters. So instead, we make it 3 American semesters. But the underlying structure is not allowed to have 2 years in the American institution and 2 years in the Chinese institution. In the past, that was possible, but it is no longer. The second way that we work around this problem when it arises is what we call direct course offering. So as I mentioned previously, right, your institution can receive a portion of the tuition revenue in China. You can send your faculty. You can issue credits to the students, right? It's acting almost to some degree as a satellite campus or a satellite location where students can take classes. The other path that is possible, if nothing else works on a 3+1, is to not go through the Ministry of Education, but instead do a provincial level partnership. And in those circumstances, it is a 3+2. So with 2 years on the American campus, it makes it easier for many institutions to form these partnerships. On that line of thought, there are some disadvantages. The cohort size gets cut in half from 100 to 50. The countervailing force is that sometimes you can do two majors or at once, so sometimes it balances itself out. However, the number of students that are expected to be recruited, though, is still much lower. These students are attending the equivalent of a community college in China, and they would receive an associate's degree from China in their 3 years of study. And then they're transferring to your campus to work on a bachelor's degree for 2 years. So, those are the disadvantages or negatives. Here's the positive. You don't have a 4-year review period. So you can actually go and in 4 years set up 4 different partnerships. And in some cases, institutions will find that they'll recruit more students and have less risk visits from a variety of institutions in China that they're recruiting from, compared to the 3+1 proposal, right? And they're also staying at your institution for 2 years compared to 1. So there's positives and negatives in everything we do, and it's about deciding which best suits your goals. So there's certain majors that are consistently popular. This list does change. Some are added and removed every year, depending on what the Ministry of Education would like. Engineering, in particular, electrical and mechanical, are very frequently likely to be approved with no problem. They are very popular by the Ministry of Education and by the students, of course. Within computer science, it's popular as well, in particular big data or data analytics. Those are two very hot areas within computer science. Currently, accounting and e-commerce has become favorable. That is atypical. A lot of partnerships in the early 2000s were in business, and so business has not been as desirable or receiving as many green lights, either from the Chinese institution or the MOE. This year, that has changed and has become more desirable. And last but not least is the arts, in particular digital media design, animation, and game design. So they're touching on the STEM, right? And that's why they are much more desired. But within the arts, there are definitely opportunities to develop partnerships as well within those typical areas of interest. So what are the big changes to the Ministry of Education guidance? As I previously mentioned, there's no more 2+2s. The MOE currently prefers 4+0s. That is the most desired form of a partnership, where an institution is, basically setting up a full satellite campus, enrolling 1,000 students, and receiving a few $1 million worth of revenue in exchange for, being able to offer its full degree in China. That's something that comes later on in discussion. It's an opportunity, but that is the primary objective, right? Is to get institutions to start with a 3+1 and then develop a very, very strong partnership. And so 3+1s are possible, still desired, but they do prefer it if you could offer some courses directly, which helps on the American side as well, right? Because it's hard to accept a student with only 1 year of credits. So that's the changes in the MOE currently. No more 2+2s. They want you to start with a 3+1, preferably where you offer some credits, and then hopefully you graduate and develop a 4+0 where you're issuing your degree in China. Very different partnership structure. Very different. Chinese youth have a very high level of unemployment, in particular graduates of universities. I anticipate that this change will influence students in higher numbers that are in these partnerships transfer in the next few years, as their Chinese degrees do not offer them enough of a competitive edge in the Chinese market, labor market. And as the economy improves there a bit in the next few years, I expect to see that, as well as, it's important to note that these partnerships take time to develop. And anything that's worked on today, the first cohort of students is going to be after the Trump administration. So it's important to have a longevity of thought when developing these partnerships, because the cohorts take time to matriculate. And so, currently Chinese economy is not very strong. Currently, there's far too many graduates of universities in China. And these two factors, I believe, will result in people who invest the time and energy today into developing these partnerships. They will have superior or very good results coming out of maybe the more tense geopolitical situation we have right now, and in particular, given that there will be a need or desire of Chinese graduates to have more than just a Chinese degree to compete in their labor market. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for watching this recording. I hope you found it useful and valuable. My name is Yasir and I'm the founder and CEO of SimpleEd. At SimpleEd, we do amazing international education events throughout the year, so please check out our website and find out more information.